The well had been in the ground since 1941. Her husband had dug it himself, not with machinery, but with a hand auger and 2 borrowed mules, at the base of a limestone shelf, where his father had found water 3 decades before. He kept a logbook for it. Every year, on the same day in May, he lowered a measuring line and recorded the depth of the water table in a green composition notebook. He did this for 41 years. When he died, Eleanor Voss kept doing it. The Voss homestead sat on 280 acres of high plateau land in a county most people drove through on the way to somewhere else. The land was dry most of the year, shortgrass and sage, red rock outcroppings along the western edge where the soil gave way to shale, but underneath it, there was water, not a river, not a lake, something older, a slow aquifer that moved through fractured limestone at a depth no surface survey could read. You couldn't see it. You could only know it was there if you had been watching long enough. Eleanor Voss had been watching it for 53 years. Her husband had been watching for 41 before her. The logbooks went back to 1948, 94 consecutive years of water table measurements from one well, on one piece of land, taken on the same week of May. She was 74 years old, and she lived alone. Her daughter was in Denver. Her son was in Boise. They called on Sundays and worried about her being out there by herself. And she told them she was fine, because she was. The trucks came in October, not to her land, to the plateau above her, 12,000 acres of leased grazing land that a ranching family had quietly sold the previous spring, mineral rights included. The buyer was a company called Harrow Meridian Group, incorporated in Nevada, with offices in Calgary. They extracted copper and molybdenum. Their website had photographs of open pit mines in 3 different countries. She heard about it at the feed store. The talk was that Harrow Meridian had a federal exploration permit and a state environmental assessment already in process. They were serious. They had money. The county had sent a letter to landowners within the survey boundary thanking them for their patience. Eleanor's name was on the list. Her property sat directly below the proposed extraction footprint downhill, downwater, downstream in every direction that mattered. She went home and opened her husband's first logbook. She read for a long time. Then she picked up a pen. If you have ever watched something being built in the wrong place and known it, in your body, in the way you know rain, before the clouds come, stay with me. This is one of those stories. Eleanor Voss was not a geologist. She had never taken a class in hydrology. She had no degree behind her name. What she had was a well, and a dead husband who had loved it the way some people love a thing they know they can never replace. And she had 1 page. The company had $80 million. The page 1. Subscribe or comment. The public comment period for Harrow Meridian's exploration permit ran for 30 days. Most people in the county didn't submit anything. They didn't know they could. A few ranchers further east wrote letters about dust and road damage. Eleanor Voss drove 40 minutes to the county planning office on a Tuesday morning in November and asked to speak to whoever handled environmental review. She was shown to a conference room where a man named Curtis Pratt sat across a folding table with a laptop and a paper coffee cup. He was from the state's Natural Resources Division. He had driven up that morning from the Capitol. She sat down. She placed a single folded sheet of paper on the table between them. I want to submit a comment on the Harrow Meridian permit, she said. Curtis Pratt opened his laptop. Of course. We're accepting written submissions through the 15th. I brought mine. He glanced at the folded sheet. 1 page, handwritten, front only. Of course, he said again, and slid it toward him without unfolding it. She leaned forward slightly. I'd like you to read it now. He looked up. She was not unkind. She was simply certain. He unfolded the page. Eleanor Voss was not a scientist, but she had spent 53 years watching what happened to her. Well, when the water table moved, and she had spent the winter before this meeting reading everything. The county library had about limestone aquifers. The one page contained 4 things. The first was a hand-drawn cross-section of the plateau, traced from a USGS topographic map, showing the elevation relationship between Harrow Meridian's proposed extraction pit and the limestone shelf on which her well sat. She had drawn it in pencil, with a ruler. The second was a table, 94 years of May water table readings from the well, every year, in her husband's handwriting or her own. The trend line she had drawn through them by hand, with the straight edge slopped upward, meaning the water table had been rising slowly over the past 40 years, consistent with the recharged aquifer. The third was a single sentence, underlined. The limestone shelf below the proposed extraction site is the recharge zone for this aquifer. Blasting will fracture it. Diesel and acid runoff from the pit will enter the fracture network. The aquifer will be contaminated within 2 years of extraction. Beginning, my well will fail within 5. The fourth was a question. Has anyone drilled a test bore below elevation 6,200 feet on the western face of the plateau, where the limestone contacts the shale? Curtis Pratt read it twice. He was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Voss, he said carefully, Harrow Meridian has commissioned a full environmental impact assessment. A licensed hydrogeological firm out of. I know, she said. I read the permit application. They drilled on the eastern face and the summit, not the western face, not below 6,200 feet. The assessment covered the full. It covered the full surface footprint, she said, not the subsurface drainage path. He looked at the page again. I'll make sure this is part of the record, he said. She nodded. That's all I'm asking, she said. She drove home. She wrote the date in her logbook. The permit was approved in March. Harrow Meridian's EIA had found no significant impact to local water resources. The hydrogeological assessment, conducted by a firm called Stratum West Environmental, had concluded that the aquifer system beneath the plateau was isolated from the proposed extraction zone by a continuous clay layer. Eleanor read the report when it was posted to the county website. She found the western face bore data on page 47. They had drilled to 120 feet. The contact zone where the limestone met the shale, where the clay layer that was supposed to isolate the aquifer, either was or wasn't, sat at between 140 and 160 feet on the western face. Depending on which section you were reading, they had stopped 20 feet short. She called the state's Natural Resources Division. She was told her comment was part of the record. The permit had been reviewed and approved. She could file an appeal within 30 days. She was 74 years old, alone, and had no lawyer. She did not file an appeal. She did something else. She found the phone number of a retired hydrology professor at the state university, a woman named Dr. Ines Ferreira, who had spent 30 years studying plateau aquifer systems and had written a paper in 1997 about recharge zones in exactly this type of limestone shale contact geology. Eleanor sent her a letter. She included a copy of the one page. 3 weeks later, Dr. Ferreira called her back. Harrow Meridian broke ground in June. The blasting began in August. Small charges first, exploratory, to assess the rock. Eleanor was in the kitchen when she felt the first one. It was not loud. It was more like a pressure change, the way a storm feels before the thunder. She went out to the well. The water level was the same. She wrote it down. In September, it dropped 2 feet, more than it had ever dropped in 53 years of measurement. In any September. She wrote it down. In October, the cattle wouldn't drink from the south trough, the one connected to the well. She tasted it. There was something there, something thin and metallic, like a penny held too long in the hand. She called Dr. Ferreira. Dr. Ferreira told her to collect a sample in a clean glass jar, seal it with a lid, and send it overnight to a certified lab. She did. 2 weeks later, the results came back. Elevated sulfate. Trace diesel hydrocarbons, suspended fine particulate consistent with disturbed limestone, pH shift of 0 point for units below baseline. The clay layer had fractured. The aquifer had been breached. Her husband's well, 41 years of his measurements, 53 years of hers was failing. The meeting was in November. Harrow Meridian sent their vice president of environmental compliance, a man named Stephen Alt, and their lead geologist, and their legal team. The state's Natural Resources Division sent 2 senior staff members and their chief hydrogeologist. The county commissioner was there. Eleanor Voss sat at the table with her, 94 years of logbooks stacked in front of her, and Dr. Inés Ferreira beside her. Dr. Ferreira spoke first. She had run her own bore analysis on the western face, at 160 feet, with the rented drill rig she had paid for herself. She had found what the Stratum West report had missed, a discontinuous clay layer, fractured at the contact zone by an ancient thrust fault, offering no isolation barrier between the extraction site and the limestone aquifer below. The fracture network Eleanor had drawn on her one-page ran exactly where Dr. Ferreira's core showed it. When she finished, Stephen Alt cleared his throat. "I'd like to ask," he said quietly, "whether anyone flagged this risk before extraction began." The state hydrogeologist looked at his hands. The county commissioner looked at the ceiling. Dr. Ferreira looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Stephen Alt. She reached into her folder and placed a copy of the one-page on the table in front of him. "I submitted this 12 months ago," she said. "Mr. Pratt has the original in the public record." Alt read it. He read it again. He put it down. "The question about the western face bore," he said, "below 6,200 feet. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. He looked very tired. "We should have answered that question," he said. Harrow Meridian suspended extraction operations the following week under a state-issued emergency order. The full hydrogeological study, they commissioned the one that should have been done the first time, took 8 months and cost $6.4 million. It confirmed everything Eleanor had written on her one page. The western face contact zone was fractured along a thrust fault running diagonally across the extraction footprint. The clay isolation layer the one Stratum West had identified and relied upon existed only above 130 feet. Below that, it was broken, intermittent, and functionally absent. The aquifer ran directly through it. Harrow Meridian settled with Eleanor Voss for an amount that was not disclosed publicly. Her well was remediated at the company's expense. It took 14 months. When the water cleared, she lowered the measuring line and recorded the depth. She wrote the date in the logbook. She made herself a cup of coffee and stood on the porch in the early light. The plateau above her was quiet now. The machinery was gone. The exploration permit had been rescinded. Somewhere up there in the limestone, the water was moving the way it always had. Slowly, silently, dark, through channels that no grid on a survey map had ever quite captured. Her husband had understood that. She had understood it because of him. And now a file in the state's Natural Resources Division contained, permanently, a copy of one handwritten page from a 74-year-old widow, the first document ever submitted to that office that correctly identified the Voss recharge zone, as Dr. Ferreira had named it in her final report. It was in the county record now. It would be there when Eleanor was gone. The land keeps its records. Sometimes if you're patient enough, and quiet enough, and you've been watching long enough, you get to keep yours too. Some knowledge isn't in the permit application. It isn't in the EIA. It isn't in the licensed firm's report, or the consultant's summary, or the vice president's briefing. It's in a green composition notebook, on a shelf above the kitchen, in a house that's been on the same piece of land for 80 years. 94 years of measurements. One page. That was enough.